technical difficulties. So I'm going to be trying to work through our class using Zach's slides on Luke's computer with a Mac, which is not my native language. So let's see what happens, people. And a battery that's down to 33%, so it may die at some point. You know,
nothing bad could happen, right?
No, what else could possibly happen? We are going to be in Genesis chapter 42 tonight if you're visiting with us, and we appreciate you guys being here. I asked Billy if he would lead us in a prayer to begin class. So, Billy, if you don't mind.
Lord, we're so thankful for this day, another opportunity that we've had to come together and worship you, sing songs of praise to you, gather around my table, to hear a portion of your word, and now to study that word and to just fellowship with one another. What a privilege it is. May we never take for granted times like this. May we always look forward to being able to worship you. We have so many that are in need of prayers. We have those who are suffering from various ailments, and we just pray that you would be with them. Be with Danny and Marcia as they tend to Danny's issues. Be with the Millers. Be with Gene Rogers. Be with Janet Joyner for the Dumases. For Elizabeth. For Lisa's sister-in-law and the struggles that she's going through. Continue to be with the Long family as Dave is nearing the end of his life here on earth, and certainly be with the Haley family as they are mourning the loss of Brother Dave. Dear Lord, life is so fragile, and this world is so wicked and evil. May we never fall into the snares of the devil and the fiery darts that he fires at us. May we always look to you for answers and wisdom and guidance as we go through this life, so we can one day have a home in heaven with you. We're thankful for this congregation. We're thankful for the men who teach and preach. And tonight we just pray that you will be with Joel and Zach as they present this lesson to us. May they have a good remembrance of the things that they've prepared. Be with us as students. May we be attentive to these things and learn from the Old Testament and apply it to our lives so we better become equipped to serve you. Be with all the teachers in the back. Go with us through the entire worship period, that all may be pleasing to you. We pray that you would go with us as we enter into this study. All these things we ask in Christ's name.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay. We are working through the three-cycle approach, so let's begin tonight's class. It's not on the slides, but let's begin with a review of the 17 periods. So we'll run through them collectively. So we have before the flood,
the flood,
the scattering of the people, the patriarchs,
the Exodus,
wandering in the wilderness, invasion and conquest, judges, united kingdom, divided kingdom, Judah alone, Judah in captivity, return from captivity, years of silence, life of Christ, letters to the Christians. All right, thank you. All right, before the flood, there were five. Well, first, what section of Scripture is covered in before the flood? Genesis 1 through 5. Thank you, Ethan Manning. What were the big events that happened in before the flood? Creation, first sin, Adam and Eve in the garden. What else? Cain and Abel, and then we have chapter 5 is generations. It's that fast forwarding, right? In the flood, what were the major things that happened in the flood? Preparation for the flood itself, meat given for food, the covenant of the rainbow, curse of Canaan, and then again we have the generations moving us forward. Scattering of the people, 11 verses. Still don't know why. Egyptian bondage, 400 years, doesn't get its own period. But what were the three events that happened in scattering of the people in Genesis 11? The building of the tower itself, the languages, or the confusion of the languages. God divides the languages, and then again we have generations move us forward. And that brings us into the period we're in tonight with the patriarchs. And who are the four major patriarchs? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Abraham begins in chapter 12 and runs to where? 25. I'm cheating, so that's why I know this. Isaac starts in chapter 25 and goes to where? 28, I think. Jacob picks up in 29 and goes to 35, and then we have Joseph from 37 to the end of the book, right? Okay. I think that's, I don't know about you, but that's a useful practice for me. Okay.
You're driving, so.
I'm driving. All right. So one of the first things before we jump into the questions.
That's what I mean, you're driving.
Oh, I'm driving
Yeah,
now.
I
Do you want to drive this?
Not really.
Okay, because
just
you've got it
push-
broken down.
You see what's coming next, just push the button when you want to see it.
Do you see what's coming?
There you
Gotcha.
go.
Gotcha.
Just spacebar when you want to advance.
Gotcha. I am so not a Mac person. All right. I want to, before we jump in, just because I think to me that one of the things that's really stood out going through this study this time, and this should not come as a shock to anybody, but Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Noah and all of these characters we've looked along the line, they were people just like you and me, right? And different cultures, different times, different circumstances, but there's still some of those idiosyncratic things that pop up that to me occasionally just give me pause and remind me that they were people just like us. Chapter 42, verse 1 is one of them, where it says, Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt. Jacob says to his son, so why do you look at one another? What would that sound like if someone said, if Billy said that to Adam today, or Andrew said that to Crawford, what would he say to it? Or if I said it to Will, what would we say? Yeah, boys, what are you just standing here looking at each other for? Let's go do something about it. And I don't know, I just love that scene because it's so reminiscent of the world we walk around in, right? Like, boys, why are you just looking at each other? Go get us some food. And so they head down into Egypt. So they head down to Egypt. And you think about this, they're going down there because their family's hungry, right? But God's about to connect a bunch of dots together and help them to start to understand that he's been at work this whole time, right? So with that, they go down there, they go before Joseph. Question 1, they say they're there to buy food. And what is Joseph's response to them? He says, you're spies. Sorry, I've got notes written every which way in here. He tells them that they're spies. Do they all go down to Egypt to buy food? Who stays behind? Benjamin. So we see again, there's still maybe a little bit of favoritism at play on the part of Jacob. Maybe a little bit of fear, and I think we see that later too. Fear that he's going to lose the only thing left he has of his wife. So he sends them down. They accuse him of being spies. What did I do?
Again.
Question 2, how does he test his brothers to see if they're lying? Is that what he, I mean, I think that's interesting, that exchange there. Let's look at that. Starting in verse, let's start in verse 8 and just read just a little bit. I think there's several things that are interesting there. In verse 8 he says, so Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Why would they, right? They all reasonably assume that he's either been sold into slavery or killed. And certainly would not imagine him to have gone from the circumstances they left him to rise to this level of prominence and this level of power in Egypt. So it says they didn't recognize him, he recognized them. And then it says, Joseph remembered the dream which he had had about them and said, you are spies, you have come to see the nakedness of the land. And they say, no, my Lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's sons. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies. So, number one, what do you take from Joseph remembered his dream? Do you think he's forgotten this dream, this promise of God? I don't think that's what it means. So what might it mean then? Crawford? Yeah. Will, were you going to say something? Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I don't think it's that he's lost his trust in God, but more so that, oh, what you said would happen has now come to fruition, and that's exactly what's going to happen, and it's a reassurance. Why do you think he accuses them of being spies?
It's almost like he wants to engage them in conversation, I feel like, and get them to kind of start explaining things. I mean, it'll look weird if he just kind of calls them out and sets them apart. Joseph's probably overseeing much of the grain distribution and all of that. And so he engages them in conversation. There's an exchange back and forth. Their story's told. Now he's got something to work with, because I think, that part about Benjamin, that's ultimately what he had in mind. Is he wants to know how his father's doing. He wants to surreptitiously discover how's dad. Is dad still alive? How's my little brother? Is he still well? And this is there's a couple of ways that you can read and kind of see Joseph's interaction with his brothers here. Some people look at Joseph, and personally, I see Joseph demonstrating a forgiving spirit from the entirety of this dialogue with his brothers. But there's a lot of people that look at Joseph and say that this is a progression where Joseph is abusing his power and he's treating them rudely and unkindly. And I think that's all part of this plan that Joseph is developing once he sees them and realizes, he remembered what God had planned is about to be brought to fruition. Those events are going to begin. And so he uses that to really launch into this entire conversation and these events that are going to transpire, where his father and his brothers and his family are brought to Egypt and protected.
Yeah. Luke? Yeah,
now 20 plus years later, because he's now 37 or 40 years old, and are they still the same vindictive, malicious people, or are they something different?
I think it's a study in shrewdness, and I think there's wisdom, because you're right. The last interaction he's had with his brothers 22 some odd years ago, what was that interaction?
Throw them in a pit, sell them into slavery.
Yeah, he was in a pit
Heartless.
crying for help, and they showed no compassion at all. So he's probably right to ascertain what kind of men they are. And you think about the irony when they say, we're honest men. Some of him must have been, okay, let's see, And so they proceed forward.
Yeah, I think verse 15 is key. Now, I just was going to point this out. By this you shall be tested. I think Joseph has forgiven. He has this forgiving spirit, but there is a testing that must take place. And I think that's going to explain some of the strange details that we're going to see happening throughout the course of this. I mean, without getting too far ahead, some of the things, bringing Benjamin back, knowing how he was treated as the favorite son of his father, his favorite wife, Rachel. He's going to want to find out, have they changed? Have my brothers' hearts changed? And this test is really, it's wise. Joseph was a wise man in how he brings all of this about. He's essentially going to recreate the scenario with Benjamin that happened to him and find out how his brothers respond to that. Are they going to do the same thing to Benjamin that they did to him, or are they going to have shown signs of having repented?
Yeah, and it really is interesting to watch their response to the possibility of Benjamin becoming stranded versus what they did to him, where they actively stranded him. So he puts them into prison for 3 days, and then what's the original deal he tells them? I'm going to let you go back, but what's the original plan?
He'll send one initially.
Right, I'm going to send one back
Benjamin
to go get your brother, and then if he comes back with your brother, then I'll let you all go. And then he softens that, right? And he says, because I fear God, which I also think is true. But what else does letting all but one go back facilitate for Joseph? Again, showing his wisdom and showing his compassion and showing his care for his family he's been detached from for 20 plus years. What else goes back with them? Okay, their money, but what else do they take home?
the grain.
They take home like satchels full, like they load their donkey. He provides his whole family with the resources they need, and sends them with provisions for travel as well, if I read that correctly, right?
And to that point, sending them all, they're going to have the opportunity to demonstrate, how are we going to handle this? What are we going to tell Dad? Are we going to bring Benjamin back? Are we going to leave Simeon to die? And so rather than just allowing them to carry all the grain back, it's again going to allow them to have that dialogue and demonstrate whether they've changed or not. I think that's one of the things that Joseph wants to see. One, he wants to get his family there, but more importantly, he wants to see, have these guys changed? Are they the same men that threw me in the pit and sold me out, years ago?
I think that's right. Okay, we answered that one. All right, question 3. Which brother remained in Egypt, and what did Joseph, we talked about their bags of grain a little bit. Who stayed in Egypt? Simeon. All right, I think it was Brother Walden's material that poses this. Why not Reuben? Reuben was the oldest. He probably should have stayed, right? He should have taken responsibility and said, hey, I'm the eldest, I'll stay.
It's possible because Reuben tried to save him. Reuben had the plan way back when Joseph was in the pit, I'm going to sneak back and get him later. And so that's possibly why. I was going to ask the same question, why Simeon? Why not Reuben? Why not any of the others for that matter? What do we know about, and this is too presumptuous, but I can't help but wonder if Simeon might have been the one that was spearheading the, hey, let's kill Joseph. Because what have we seen previously with Simeon? What's that? Yeah. He's shown himself to be a man of violence, a man who's not afraid to take innocent life. And I can't help but wonder, and maybe, like I said, maybe that's putting too much together, but I can't help but wonder if he might have been the one that kind of came up with, hey, let's kill Joseph idea. And so Joseph now's like, he would have heard that conversation that was taking place. And so, okay, Reuben was going to save me. Simeon was going to kill me. Simeon's staying here, so.
Well, and there's nothing in the text that suggests back in chapter 37 that they would have been aware that Reuben had this plan to save Joseph, and it's explicit in chapter 42 that they thought Joseph could not understand them, but obviously he could, right? And so they say this when Reuben speaks up and says, "See, y'all, I told you, this is what's come to us as a consequence of our sin." And so it is interesting that he chooses to keep Simeon and lets Reuben go back. I mean, I don't think you could carve that in stone, but it is an interesting little detail.
Crawford?
Studied the story of Judah. Like, why does God just include narrative about Simeon and Levi, Reuben, and Judah? Because the Bible's not just a history book. Like, there's always a focus and a effort in it. And as we come to this story, I think it's interesting to see that all of the past events we've learned about before then play into this story. Reuben in the past has been a man that wants to do great things and then kind of falls short. Judah was a total scumbag. He was the one that sold him into. And so you kind of see this redemption arc for Judah and Simeon both coming around and being self-sacrificial.
Yeah, I know we'll get there in a minute, but Reuben makes a pretty significant offer to his father to be able to take Benjamin back, and his dad won't buy it. But Judah makes the ultimate offer, right? Is I'll be the answer to that claim. And you think about that in contrast to Judah saying, "Hey, let's sell him," And I agree. It's a nice growth arc for Simeon. Okay. Let's see. What did I do?
For another question?
Sir?
You looking for another question?
Looking for it.
I think it's just not coming along until this section here.
Oh,
so we got a little bit to talk about in between if you want.
Yeah, jump in, please.
Oh, no, just textually. So he tells them to bring Benjamin back. That's going to be the test to demonstrate whether they were telling the truth or not. I found verses 26 through 28, there's an interesting statement there that show you his brothers have not... The guilt of what they did to Joseph way back when has been on their mind ever since, and they see God's bringing this all full circle. They ask the question, what has God done to us? Because they realize the jeopardy now that Benjamin's in, and what that's going to do to Jacob, and how now they're going to have to walk the line. They're trying to thread the needle for a very serious event. Their well-being, their children's well-being, grandchildren, if those are relevant. Their family all hinges on this, and it reminds them, what have we gotten ourselves into? Why is God doing this to us? They feel their guilt for what they've done, and then they go on and report back to Jacob in verses 29 through 34.
Yeah, I'm glad you stopped us for a second, because there is that place where he says, I'm going to let all of you go home and just keep one of you. And there had to be this part of them, because they don't understand what's happening yet. There had to be this part of them that thought, why did we say anything about our father, let alone our other brother? Now all we've done is we've put them in danger too. And verse 21 in particular, you mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. Then they said to one another, we are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore, this distress has come upon us. And Crawford, I think to your point, there's no excuses in that, right? They're recognizing that they're paying the consequences of their hearts being what they were toward Joseph then. They seem to have that moment where they get that pretty clearly. And then they have to go home and, of course, report that to their dad.
Yes, that's what verses 29 through 34 are really about. They just go and just kind of recount the events. One significant detail that reappears in verse 35, when Joseph sends them back with the grain, what does he put in the bags? Okay, he puts the money that they brought to pay for the grain, he sticks that back in there, and that's going to be a reoccurring thing, and there's purpose in that.
Yeah. He certainly seems to be dropping breadcrumbs along the way. I mean, it's leading on up later on, I think in chapter 43, where he seats them at their banquet in birth order, right? Which, they had to have just been completely unsettled by that before he finally reveals himself. So they go home and they tell their dad. What's Jacob's response when they go home and relay, Dad, this is what happened. This is why Simeon's not with us. We've got to take Benjamin back. What's his response? Yeah, and now you want to take Benjamin too, right? And it's interesting. I couldn't find anything that gave us any sense how long it was from the time they got back and reported it until they were out of food and had to go again. But it seems like Jacob's response is just kind of, hey, we're going to cut our losses here. It's bad enough as it is. Look what you've done to me. And they just leave it, right? But what changes? They run out of food, right? At some point, you got to do something. So they are out of food. Reuben goes, and in question 4, how does Reuben try to persuade his father? Yeah. It shows something about Reuben's mind and Reuben's spirit too, right? Do you think he's intent on making sure Benjamin gets there safely and comes back somehow? And he's making promises he knows he can't really absolutely keep. But the severity of the need is such that he's willing to say, kill my 2 sons if I can't bring you back.
His heart may be in the right place, but man, his application of that is very poor.
It is.
Yeah, let me just kill my grandkids if I lose Benjamin, as if that's going to make things better, And so kill your grandkids, for the loss of Benjamin. It's just like I said, and I think kind of maybe it just reflects on how much has Reuben grown, if that's versus Judah, who's going to make a very different offer.
That's right.
So
that's right. Reuben is still willing to sacrifice something other than himself, where Judah has grown to the point that he's willing to sacrifice even himself. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's what happens, beginning with chapter 43. Go ahead and punch a slide if you would.
Yeah.
They do, like Joel said, they run out of food. And so they realize something has got to be done. We can't stay here anymore. We can't wait it out, just to see if the famine is going to end. So this time, Judah comes, and Judah makes an appeal to his father as to entrust Benjamin to his care. So in what way did Judah persuade Jacob to send Benjamin with him to Egypt? Yeah, unlike Reuben, who said, "Kill my sons if something happens to Benjamin," Judah said, "I'll be the pledge. I'll be the one who lays the life on the line if something happens to Benjamin." Can't. I will be the pledge for his safety. Let me bear the blame. Just tones of Isaiah 53 and what Jesus has done for us. Absolutely.
There's some wisdom and I think some intelligence too in Judah's approach, though, because he doesn't just hang it on that. He also basically says to his father that, listen, if we don't go, we're all going to die, right? I mean, he paints a pretty grim picture. None of us will live if you don't let me go. And if we go without Benjamin, we might as well not go. Mm-hmm. And so he offers himself as surety, which again, he has no idea how that's going to work out. And then I think you see Jacob's wisdom too, because once Jacob agrees to let him go, what else do they do as they prepare to go down to Egypt?
Take a little gift.
Yeah, they take gifts.
Jacob knows how that kind of smooths over, the kind of
he's
rough
had
spots.
some experience, right? He did the same thing with Esau. He's had some experience with those kinds of things. And what else do they take?
Double the money.
Double the money, right? Because he's not looking for any handouts let's not miss the point. He's also trying to avoid any allegation of misconduct. Yeah. But I also think he's trying to make sure, I got grain from you. I expected to pay for it. I'm not looking for anything outside of what's fair. Yes, sir, Luke. Yeah, that's right. He's looking to make the payment. Okay. All right, so they head back down to Egypt in 43:11 through 15.
Yeah, so they meet up with the steward as soon as they arrive, and they say, "Hey, we ended up somehow with our money in our sack. Here's the money we owed from last time, and here's the additional money for this time's grain." And the steward says, "Hey, I've been paid. Your God must have blessed you, and gave you money back." So he kind of answers that, and it's at that point too that Joseph finds out that they've arrived. He said, "Hey, you're going to have supper with me tonight," or whatever meal it was. And so they begin to prepare for that. That's what the preparation is about. They're preparing for the meal that they're going to share with Joseph. And this is where the test is really going to amp up.
All right, so question 6. What was Joseph's response to seeing his brother Benjamin? Never doing this again. What was his response? He weeps. So much so that he has to leave the room, right? Mm-hmm. So why do you think the weeping?
Well, Benjamin, one was his full brother.
Right, Benjamin was his full brother.
Versus the others. Benjamin probably would have treated him better than the others would have. He would have been young. I mean, Joseph's 17, so Benjamin could have been a young boy at the. Yeah, I mean, it's been what?
I read some stuff, probably 9 or 10.
20 years old.
Taken. Yeah.
Since he's seen his brother, and just the knowledge that his father and his brother is well.
Yeah. At least when I read this, there's at least I think you got to consider the possibility that Joseph may have thought, yeah, you're saying Benjamin's still around, but I don't know if he's around. Yeah. Why would you treat him any differently than you treated me? If he is around, how have you treated him? Has he been treated as a second-class citizen or as treated as a slave or who knows what? So seeing him, it's his brother, right? His full brother. But I also think seeing him indicates what about his other brothers? I mean, it's an evidence of some change on their part, right? That they've gone to do this difficult thing, and they're doing it because here he is, and they've brought him back, and they've come back with the money that they owed. Even though I know Joseph's going to give it back to him again, that test that you were talking about, that test is playing out, and so far, that what they said back at the beginning of chapter 42, we are honest men, that wasn't true back in chapter 37, but it seems to be true now. And I think that that's encouraging. Anything else? Okay. Question 7. What stands out about the dinner party? We mentioned this a little bit. There's several things that stick out about it. Right. So the 5 times for Benjamin. And while I think all of this was calculated on Joseph's part to assess their character, I don't think we have to avoid the possibility that he might have enjoyed watching their faces when he sat them in the right order, and just sort of what is going on here. They sit them in so what else is interesting about the banquet or stuck out to you about the banquet?
Well, see, Joseph ate separately from the Hebrews, so it was an abomination for the Jews and the Hebrews and the Egyptians to mix, and that's going to have some relevance later on when it comes to securing them a place to live because of their trades.
Right. Joseph sits separately, and the other Egyptians that are there also sit separately from them, and we've mentioned this. It says it here in chapter 43, but then it says it explicitly a little bit farther forward in chapter 46 that the Egyptians looked at shepherds as an abomination, so they couldn't even sit with his brothers. Now, imagine they're surprised when they find out who Joseph really is, right? But even that, and we see that come to play when they get placed in the land of Goshen, because again, as we've talked about previously, it keeps them separate. It keeps them from assimilating into the culture they're around. Yes, Luke.
Verse 24, this is where he brought them in, killed an animal, and was getting ready to feed them. So I don't think it was a commonplace for the second in command of Egypt to bring in every person that came in to buy grain. He had a purpose to honor his brother. I think it was part of the deal also for them to have more of that individual time where he can see them. And so, but when we get down to where he sees Benjamin, we know that
well, and in preparing for this, and I'd never thought this thought before, but in preparing for this, in reading through some of the Waldron stuff, it pointed out that it seems like Joseph was already in process of preparing the plan to have them relocate to Goshen while all this is playing out, because he's got the plan. Like when he reveals himself, he says, "Go home and get Dad. I've got a place lined up for you." And that seems, and so you see again God's wisdom, God's providence, but you also see Joseph's intentionality and planning that he's going to make sure his family's taken care of. Mm-hmm. He just doesn't know the full extent of how true that's going to be.
That one detail, we don't want to miss that. Giving 5 times as much to Benjamin, I think that's part of the test. Why do you think Joseph does that?
That's a good point.
What's he showing that Jacob showed a favorite? Yeah, showing favoritism. Joseph had the coat, and that favoritism is why his brothers hated him. He's showing favoritism to Benjamin, and he's wondering how are they going to respond to this. And, the test really comes to a head in chapter 44, if you want to go ahead and advance that, Joel. I think we're done with 43. So they dine, he gives them the grain, he then sends them on their way, and before they load the grain up, what does he tell his steward to do? Okay. Put the money back in and put his divination cup, he calls it, in Benjamin's sack. So they're headed back, and then he tells the steward, "All right, go get them." So the steward arrives, and they're traveling back, and it's got to be a surprise to them to, what's he doing here? We didn't take anything. We just ate with the second in command. What's going on? And so he says, did you think you could get away with it? My master practices divination. And I kind of thinking back to that, lining them up in order. I wonder if that might have reinforced in their mind that Joseph had some sort of supernatural knowledge. He's a practicer of divination. And we know that Joseph wasn't as a believer in Yahweh, but, whatever pretense or thoughts that they may have had about it, we know that they knew of Joseph's supernatural knowledge to interpret dreams. And so, why did you take my master's divination cup? And they said, we didn't take anything. They open up all the sacks, and they says, okay, whoever has it, you can take us if you find it in any of our sacks. So they start opening them up and find it in Benjamin's sack, of course, and how that must have just been a gut punch to all of them to have opened up Benjamin's sack and then to see the cup there. And so next section. Oh wait, we got Crawford comment.
I'm going to take his telescope.
It's kind of like Rachel in the Idols, right?
Well, I hadn't thought about that either, but when he gives Joseph 5 times everybody else, he gets an opportunity to kind of see how they respond to Joseph being treated differently, right? Like, have you really changed? Again, it's another chance to assess their character.
And that's what this is about. He puts it in Benjamin's sack, not just so they'll have to come back. They can throw Benjamin under the bus, right, if they want.
Yeah.
They can, like I said, it's Joseph recreating what they did to him. And he gives them that same opportunity. He shows the favoritism. He gives them an out. Are they going to leave Benjamin here like they left me? Are they going to abandon him like they abandoned me? And I think that's what most of these details that Joseph shows are working toward. Because they say, hey, we'll all stay here. We're all going to serve you. And he said, nope, just the one that had the cup. And so it's going to be Benjamin. I'll keep him here. And that's where Judah comes onto the scene.
Yeah, and that comes through, I hope, really crystal clear in this narrative. Like, this is an opportunity. If they've got food, they've got their money back, they can cut the new favored son loose and leave him hanging, and they can go home and say, Dad, that mean old guy in Egypt, it was everything you said it was, and they've got an opportunity. And instead, how does Judah break through? What is Judah's response when Joseph says, nope, y'all go home, Benjamin's staying with me? What's Judah's response? He pleads for him. What else does he do? Yeah.
The emphasis seems to be on the pledge that Judah has made to give himself in Benjamin's place, but how this is going to affect Jacob. I think the term I read somewhere, the term father in Judah's conversation with Joseph is used like 14 times, and so he's emphasizing, and what he eventually says is, my father's life is bound up in the life of the boys. So if you keep him here, Dad's going to die. My father's going to die. And he speaks about, he just kind of tells the history of his father's love for Rachel, his preferred wife, and then his love for his firstborn son from her, who is no more, and just all of the events that transpired. And he's just really trying to connect with him and help him understand. Maybe he'll show pity, And so he kind of just uses his pledge and Jacob's love for Benjamin and tries to break through and see if there might be just a shred of compassion in Joseph.
And it does, but I think the thing that finally breaks Joseph's facade, charade, whatever, the test comes to an end and he reveals himself for who it is when you see, and you mentioned it, Luke, you mentioned it, Judah says, I'll stay, and sacrifices himself, let the boy go, which is the exact opposite of what happened when Joseph was in the pit begging for mercy, and they sat there and ate their meal with no regard and no mercy. So you see this massive shift in who Judah is, which I think again speaks to why it was Judah that God chose to run the lineage of Christ through. Luke?
This is a moving section to see Judah and his heart for Benjamin's willing to sacrifice himself, the promise and the willingness to offer himself this is such a beautiful part of the Bible.
It really is. I mean, it's evidence of what God's presence in your life does for somebody, right? I mean, there's such a growth that happens for him. Okay. Question 10. Who does Joseph attribute his being in Egypt to, and why? Yeah, God. Do you suppose there was any part of this that came as a surprise to Joseph? I mean, he's faithful, right? We don't have any indication that Joseph ever lost his fidelity to the Lord. But once it's all played out, even Joseph must have been in awe of God's wisdom and God's providence and everything that's happened. All those trials he went through, he must look back on now and go, makes perfect sense. And absolutely worth it too, right? Yeah. Yeah. Doesn't make it any less difficult, the things he suffered, but worth it.
I think there's a valuable point of application for us. So we've said a couple of times, Joseph's been in Egypt about 20 years, and think of all the things he suffered. He's being sold into slavery, being elevated, and then being falsely charged with sexual assault, and then being imprisoned again, being forgotten in prison. All of these things that Joseph has dealt with. He's there for some 20 years, and finally at this point in time it clicks when he realizes God sent me here, God's going to use me. And sometimes that's how suffering seems, right? Where you just don't understand why this is happening, and that's what we ask in the midst of our suffering and pain is, God, why is this happening to me? But what we've got to do is, just like Joseph, we've got to hold on to faith, because either in this life at some point in time later or in the life to come, we'll understand. But what we've got to realize is what Joseph knew and what he refused to relinquish despite everything else that he suffered is that I'm going to put my faith in God. God will not let me down. And if we understand it in this life, all the better. If not, we can just put our confidence in the Lord and know, as we sing about, we'll understand it, all by and by. So, Luke. We're 2 years
Doesn't
in.
he tell them?
He
does
says
he
there's
tell them
5
there's
more
5 more
years
years in the family?
remaining. So,
yeah. And to me, again, one of the takeaways, you can trust fully without fully understanding. So I thought this was an interesting thought question. And while clearly the main plot line is Joseph's narrative, there is this very vivid subplot about Judah's maturity. So what do you think caused the spiritual maturity in Judah? We got about 2 minutes to talk about that. What things happened along the way?
I think the Tamar event was pivotal in holding up a mirror and showing Judah what he really was. Because we know, we talked about that, we saw the events that transpired. He seems to have separated himself from his family after that. And, when he says, bring out, Tamar, who was allegedly, had been unfaithful, bring her out and burn her. And she says, I'm a child by the man to whom these signet and seal belong. It's Judah. And that proclamation, she is more righteous than I am. And in the statement there says he didn't know her again. I think you start to see that's one of the pivotal events where we see Judah turning. Yeah. So it showed him who he was. We see the seeds of repentance. That seems to have grown through the years. to cause him to mature.
I also I thought about that. I also just thought about the experience he's been through. He's a father now, right? He's had twins, and we know the whole narrative with Perez kind of usurping Zerah, but you look at things. I imagine he probably looked at his father's grief over Joseph differently once he had children of his own.
And he lost 2 sons, so he could
Yeah,
relate in a
he did.
unique way in that way as well. Despite the fact that they were wicked, but versus Joseph who was righteous, but he knows what it's like to lose a son.
That's true too.
So,
Yeah.
But you certainly see a change in Judah's character that would cause him to go from being the one to like, hey, let's get rid of our bum brother, to I'm willing to lay my life down for my brother.
Yeah. And that's a pretty inspiring message.
Certainly.
All right. Thank you for your time and attention.